Welcome to another episode of the Holistic Counselor Podcast. I'm your host, Diana, and today we're diving into all things teens. I'm really excited about this conversation because although I no longer work with teenagers after decades of doing so, I still get calls from people seeking guidance on how to help teens or navigate the challenges of raising them. I did raise four. So I thought it would be helpful to bring on someone with incredible expertise in this area to share insights with us. Joining me is Mike Giresi. Yeah, okay. The Chief Clinical Officer of Family First Adolescent Services, a premier residential treatment center in South Florida. Mike's passion for helping others stems from his own healing journey, and his impressive credentials include being a Florida certified addiction counselor, internationally certified alcohol and drug counselor, and a nationally certified trauma professional. He's also a NARM master practitioner, where he teaches professionals around the world how to work with complex trauma in adolescents. Mike, I'm thrilled to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here.
Wonderful. Okay, before we even get started, what is NARM?
NARM is model that was originally created by one of my mentors and teachers, Dr. Lawrence Heller. It's a model, the acronym NARM stands for the NeuroAffective Relational Model. It's a mouthful. The
Wow.
model that was specifically designed for treating attachment, relational, and developmental trauma, or what's kind of being coined in our field as complex trauma.
Right. CPTSD. Okay, so I have been practicing, complex PTSD and everything in the inner city and stuff because of my background. And NARM has never even came on my radar. So now I'm really curious about that because now I'll probably rabbit hole it and try to listen to every YouTube and podcast about it. So this is wonderful. And I'm sure you're going to go into it a little more. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely an approach that informs a lot of how I relate to, some of the core difficulties that people have and working with the kids. And
Oh, all right. Is there a book about it at all or something
yeah,
I
it's funny. It's one of those books that a lot of people have on their bookshelf, like in their therapist office, kind of a thing.
Okay.
And they didn't necessarily know it was the NARM book. It's called Healing Developmental Trauma:
Okay.
How Early Trauma Affects Self-Regulation, Self-Image, and the Capacity for Relationships.
Okay.
It's a green book. It's funny that so in just a couple years ago, the World Health Organization
Mhm.
announced the formal recognition of CPTSD as a formal diagnosis.
It's not in the DSM yet.
It hasn't made its way to the United States in the DSM, but it is
Ah.
now in the ICD-11.
Oh, cool.
And the three additional symptom categories. So the book that Larry wrote, Dr. Heller wrote and published and released in 2012, that subtitle, How Early Trauma Affects Self-Regulation, Self-Image, and the Capacity for Relationship.
Hmm.
Three new symptom categories for CPTSD, according to the ICD-11, are
Mm.
self-regulation, self-image, and the capacity for relationship. So
Wow.
it just spoke to the brilliance of how he really designed this model specifically to address those kinds of underlying patterns of both nervous system dysregulation and identity distortions of how harshly people relate to themselves as they carry those patterns forward from their early life adversity.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So if CPTSD does get into the DSM in America, I'm telling you, that DSM is going to turn into a pamphlet instead of the big fat book.
I think that that's right.
Well, anyway, all right. So I think we're on the same page when it comes with adolescents and labeling them, but we're not even going to go in there. We're going to start with how did you end up being here in mental health, right? Because I know there's a little bit about your own journey. Will you share that with us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the I think the Cliff Notes version is I got in my late teens, early 20s, really struggled in a bunch of different ways, ended up going to residential treatment multiple times
Wow.
and getting into recovery from alcoholism and drug abuse. And I was so broken and hopeless, and uh, I felt so unlovable,
Mm,
and I was surrounded by these people that I went to treatment with that were spending time with me,
yeah.
and they were, giving of themselves in ways that I just didn't feel like I deserved even at that time. And there's this saying in 12-step recovery that we're going to love you until you love yourself.
Wow.
That was really my experience, was that people were there for me that when I didn't think that I deserved it. And
Wow.
the through that process, really, I experienced a transformation of how I related to myself and the world and spirituality and everything in between, and fell in love with helping others in the ways that I was helped. And then, as that just kind of progressed, uh, my focus really turned towards teens and working with kids in a way that, I could be for them in a certain kind of way that I didn't have and always needed.
Right.
And it's been really special.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, how long have you been working for Family First?
Uh, Going on 10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So that's, yeah, you're getting more. So what trends are you seeing? Because if you've been doing this now, I know like I took a little breather, like I was a therapist in nonprofit community mental health. Then, as the audience knows, if they've been listening, that, my youngest son had a traumatic brain injury. So I quit, tried to help with him in his situation. He was about 12 years old when this happened. And then he got better. And then I did not want to go back to being a therapist. So I ended up in the film industry. So I took a little break. And then, but I always kept my, certifications up just in case. And then after the Parkland shooting is when I went back to being a therapist with teens at an alternative high school. So when I got back, I already saw a whole bunch of trends happening, and I was like blown away. But now that I'm not, because as therapists we have to have continued education, not just for the license, but if you're a great therapist, you want to continually educate yourself, right? And so what trends are you seeing with adolescents more than anything right now?
Sure. First off, I completely agree with you. So much of effective therapy, I think, comes from this kind of spirit of humility, which is all
Mm,
learning, because it's all about not knowing and the recognition that you don't know.
mm,
So we're definitely on the same page there with continued education, and that's both education externally and internally, right?
that's
That
right.
the knowing ourselves more and more deeply is really the greatest thing that we could do for our clients,
Mm.
because you can't really help somebody navigate territory that you haven't navigated inside of yourself.
Ooh, love that, Mike. Yeah, preach it. All right, sorry. That's wonderful. Okay, so like you're right. It's becoming self-aware within ourselves, right? Therapist or not therapist, listener, right? Is just becoming awake to who you are and why you believe what you believe,
Yeah.
right?
In terms of trends, I mean, there's a couple of different routes we could go. I think
Mhm.
in terms of trends with the kids, with the teens,
Yeah, teens
uh,
only.
yeah, the with the teens, I think that there's a far greater what we've seen come into our facility and
Yeah.
our into our program is a lot more self-harm,
Mm,
a way more dissociative processes and related disorders,
mhm,
um a slew of more uh teens coming in with either undiagnosed or already coming in with a diagnosis of autism.
Yeah.
The
Wow.
uh, there's this like classic kind of thing in our field where we used to talk about how treatment with girls was oftentimes like this they would act in on
Hmm.
themselves more than they would act out
Hmm.
towards others, whereas boys would oftentimes more act out more than act in.
All right.
And that distinction does not exist anymore.
Mm. Well,
The
why do you think that is?
I'm really not quite sure. I'm sure it's very complex, having to do with culture and community and social media and all kinds of other dynamics in the home and the pandemic and all of the trickle down effects of these systemic failures that the kids really end up being the receptacles of.
Yes, right.
Um,
We like to blame the next generation, and that's the thing. It's like understanding that we're the ones raising them,
Yeah,
right?
the way that I've learned to put it, this actually came directly from Larry, who I was mentioning earlier. He,
Hmm.
he's When he first said it, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. He said, "A young child can't understand that they can be a good child in a bad situation.
Oof. Wow, that's deep.
Children are hardwired to internalize the failures of their environment because to experience your environment, the only thing that's in charge of your survival as failing you is too threatening.
Mm.
So, in order to preserve the idea that my environment that's in charge of my survival is good, I make
Hmm.
myself bad."
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's good stuff, Mike. Like, yeah, people need to hear this. And if there's a teenager listening, understand that you're not alone. Like there are people, special people like Mike and the others, because I know Amanda and your tribe that's been created at Family First. Like I've gotten to know him. This is why I'm like, all right, give me Mike, please. Go get him and let him come on my show. Because we need more people to have that understanding. So like the trends that I saw before I stopped taking adolescents is, you're right, the self-harming, but what I saw a lot of was young men, young boys, right? And I've never seen anything like this marijuana psychosis in the way I've seen now, and because I'm like, and it is a trickle down, it is an environmental situation. Because back in the day, listen, I grew up in the 80s, early 80s, and when I was smoking pot, it was 4%, not 90%, right? Like this medical stuff that they're getting their hands on mixed with other things. I wasn't staying up all night. I was sometimes, but not playing video games. I wasn't indoors. Most of the time, I'm outside playing in the woods or doing things or going in the streets. And so I see this perfect storm where the cyberbullying, the social media, the video games, and they're not having enough time out in nature, in creation. And it's like, because honestly, they're like, no, miss, that's all I smoked was marijuana. And I believe them. Why would they lie to me? Most of them are really honest. That's what I love about teens. They are so brutally honest that there's no lying once they develop the rapport with the therapist, because sometimes therapy has hurt them more than helped them. So what else are you seeing?
I mean, everything that you just said, felt like I was trying to watch my head, not nodding too much. The um the marijuana induced psychosis is a massive issue that
Yeah.
everyone needs to be more and more educated on.
Mm-hmm.
The social media dynamics of, I'm a little mixed on the social media dynamics because I think it's so related to some of these things that we were talking about a moment ago around these early attachment experiences
Mm-hmm.
that, and there was this guy. So I'm a huge nerd. I don't know if you know this about me, but
No.
so like when everybody's listening to like rock, like 80s hairband music in the gym,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, I'm listening to like the psychoanalytic theory of borderline personality disorder by, Otto Kernberg.
That's me
Uh,
too.
yeah. So there was this guy, his name was Ballant, and he was an old psychoanalyst. He was an understudy of Freud, and he talked about the what Freud called primary narcissism
Mm.
stage of development that
Mm-hmm.
really kind of ticked Ballant off. And he didn't see narcissism as a stage of development, but rather as a product of development gone awry.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of backtracking a little bit to define narcissism in the way that I like to define it. It's become this social media term that it's a little
Yes.
and misunderstood. The it comes right from the Greek mythos of Narcissus.
Mm-hmm.
Narcissus caught his reflection in the water and fell in love. And a lot of people misunderstand that story to mean that he fell in love with himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what narcissism is this over indulgence in ourselves and all of that kind of stuff. And that's actually not what happened. He
Mm.
fell in love with himself. He fell in love with the image of himself in the water. And what happened across the entire story was that he would move and the image would change, right? And
Mm.
and he would freak out because he fell in love with that image. So he kept himself incredibly still and just looking at this image of himself at the cost of he stopped eating, he stopped taking care of himself, and ultimately he actually died.
Wow.
And the idea is that, so from this story, what is narcissism then? Narcissism is the investment of our life energy in maintaining our self-image.
Wow.
And that can be on a very subtle
Mhm.
level, and it can be on a very extreme level where you see people who are willing to die to protect how it
Yeah.
is that they relate to themselves,
Mm.
this image that they've created for themselves.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So why that relates to this whole social media thing, right?
Mm.
Is the oftentimes from a psychological perspective, this image of ourselves that we're so identified with and holding strong to, typically the degree at which we are invested in maintaining that image
Mm.
is the degree that that image protects us from this early wounding and the
Mm.
shame that comes with it.
Wow.
So when you see these kids who are on social media, who are painting this picture of
Mm-hmm.
themselves to the world, trying to portray this image of themselves that's perfect and infallible. You see them, the body dysmorphia that's
Yeah.
happening with editing pictures and
Mm.
filters. You start to see how they're negatively comparing themselves to others constantly.
Yeah.
See, it's a recipe to really kind of reinforce all of these dynamics that are keeping them so stuck
Yeah.
in many aspects of their lives because this image that they're so invested in
Mm.
is just getting fed over and over and over again. And then when it's not getting fed, all of their wounding and shame starts to come to the surface, and then they end up acting out or acting in on themselves to try and get back to the image.
Wow. Wow. I have never heard that before. And I'm telling you, I've been working with adolescents for a long, long time. So, what do we do about this situation then? Like, how does your program or you, as a therapist or other therapists that you work with in this NARM or at your adolescent services, like, what do you do? Like, you have a teenager or a parent that comes in, like, what's the first steps into getting to that healing state?
Oh, man. I think first off is assessing at any level of care, right? It's assessing whether this is the most appropriate level of care for this
Mhm.
person. And that oftentimes has to do with just in how much risk or danger are they in
Right.
without a certain level of external containment and support.
Mm-hmm.
Each level of care is essentially increasing the level of external containment and support.
Okay.
All the way up to the most restrictive, right, which is a psychiatric stabilization,
Right.
where you're so at risk to yourself that
Mm-hmm.
can't be trusted to your own devices in any way, shape, and form, basically.
Mm-hmm.
All the way to a much more mild form, which is you are having some difficulties in your relationships. You're having some difficulties with anxiety and depression. And so you go and you seek some support from somebody individually and otherwise. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's everything in between. The I think it's helpful from my perspective to think about it in the way of like, okay, why is it that these people have sought treatment?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that they're looking for? We need to start there. What is it that they're wanting to address? What is it that they're wanting to get out of this? Because the, I'll say this, right? The two most common symptoms that
Mm-hmm.
anyone goes to any form of treatment for, adult, child, or adolescent,
Mm-hmm.
is anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and depression, right?
Yep. Symptoms.
Those are about as nondescript as a fever.
Right.
A fever could be driven from any of a billion different places.
Mm-hmm.
Same with anxiety and depression. And so the treatment approach has to start with, again, from my point of view and how we do it here, is relating to those symptoms that people are coming in, oftentimes very painful symptoms,
Yeah.
as forms of communication, both to themselves and the environment, about underlying attachment, relational, and developmental trauma, how they had to shut down and disconnect from parts of themselves and adapt to what was available to them in their environment rather than what it was that they actually needed. And
Mm-hmm.
those adaptive patterns have been carried forward and are now causing all of these different symptoms in their lives. The so assessing appropriateness of the level of care, relating to the complexity of these symptoms and difficulties that a family and a teenager are bringing, in
Mm-hmm.
a way of not wanting to so quickly eradicate those symptoms and behaviors, but really listen to and understand them.
Mm-hmm.
Honor the fact that they've served a function,
Yeah.
and that there's wisdom in every symptom, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite ways of describing this, with particularly with depression,
Mm-hmm.
that depression oftentimes is described, right, as like a symptom a uh, or a disorder or some kind of illness, or I've even heard people describe it as a brain disease
Yeah.
and all these different kinds of things. Well, let's not say that it's not those things, but put those things on the shelf for a moment and consider the possibility that depression isn't so much a symptom or a disorder, as much as when I have a need or an emotion that doesn't feel safe or deserving of connecting with and expressing, what do I need to do to that need or emotion?
Mm.
I have
Oh,
to
yeah.
express it.
Right.
Well, or what you do to a pedal on the when you want to stop driving your car, right?
Mm-hmm.
You depress the brake.
Right.
So you stop it. If I want to stop feeling, if I
Mm.
want to stop needing,
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that the chronic suppression of our needs and emotions is what oftentimes is the manifestation of this, what we call depression. This lethargy and lack of motivation and
Yeah.
uh,
Loss of hope,
loss of
loss of
hope,
purpose.
loss of purpose,
Mhm.
negative self-concept, and all of
Automatic negative thoughts that have been, you've been believing since childhood because, yeah.
in the function of those negative thoughts towards the self are to shut down and disconnect
Mm.
from my own wants and desires and impulses and feelings that feel too threatening.
Right.
And so in that way, depression isn't so much, again, a symptom or a disorder, but it's actually a survival mechanism. And if we can, again, understand how to listen for those kinds of things, it sets the treatment trajectory in a completely different way than if we were just trying to make someone feel better.
Mm, right.
Oftentimes, therapy doesn't, yeah, that personal experience, right? It's like therapy doesn't oftentimes make me feel better.
Right.
The heroin used to make me feel better, but I don't recommend it.
No.
The
Right. Yeah,
the
no, no. I listen, I used to do drugs and drink alcohol, and I was a big partier back in the day and stuff like that because I know now because I've done like you're talking to another wounded healer.
that's right.
Okay. And so, like, from our history, from my own history and background, yeah, I look back, but I've done the work. I realized that depression, I think I was more anxious than anything. I was a high anxiety kind of girl, and marijuana, man, that was my go-to starting in middle school.
Yeah.
Right. And I tried to function all through high school. And I'm not suggesting that people that are, if you're listening and you're anxious, please do not go straight to the marijuana. Why don't you figure this stuff out now at a young age? Because guess what? There's still consequences for the things that I did as a teenager. Even though I'm better now, I just still have to live with certain consequences, right? And this is part of growing up and part of my purpose. And so like Mike, I know you see a lot. Like that could, I know I was seeing a lot too. And I think that's why I had to take a break from adolescence. And plus, honestly, it was trying to deal with parents. This is the next question for you because you work with the family.
Yeah,
Okay.
very intensely. Yeah.
Yes. And so when you say very intensely, what do you mean? Because to me, I remember, some parents are like, just fix my kid, but they never wanted to do their own work or they didn't want to see it like their responsibility in the situation. And that's when the kids they start escalating more and more. And they're like, see, they don't effing want to know. And they would just pop off. And so I would have to continue to de-escalate. And it was like going around in a circle. I mean, some parents did do the work and get it, but like, what do you do with that? And what would you tell a teenager listening to right now going, okay, you're at this place, you're feeling anxious and depressed. Like, what should they do right now? Like, what is it that you recommend? Or I know it's hard for us therapists to advise anything on a platform like this, because if they do something and, I don't want, you know, but there's got to be something to give them hope.
I think one of the processes that we employ here that I
Mm-hmm.
decided a long time ago was that when the family comes and brings their son into treatment, the first week that we're talking with his caregivers, his
Mm-hmm.
family, they are creating their own individualized parent treatment plans.
Really?
First family therapy session is so, well, before I get to that, as you could probably imagine with your experience, the first draft of that parent treatment plan is oftentimes, well, I want Johnny to start doing this, and I want Johnny to start doing that, and then I want Johnny to feel better, and all of that kind of, it's all about Johnny.
Yes.
So from the front door, we're
Mm-hmm.
able to start intervening about, okay, and if Johnny were to do this differently, what are you hoping that would change for you?
Mm-hmm.
If Johnny were to listen more or feel better, what would be on the other side of that for you? How would your life feel different? And we start to orient them back to themselves around their own, what it is that they are most wanting for themselves out of this whole process.
Okay.
As we start to reorient them, sometimes more gently, sometimes more directly,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what's needed,
Yeah.
they make these consensual agreements to that they've identified these different difficulties that they're personally having, and then some goals that they have to address those things.
Okay.
In the first family therapy session where we bring everybody together, their son is more often than not wrought with anxiety
Yeah.
and ready for a battle.
Mm-hmm.
ready to just get eviscerated and told that he's the whole problem and everything that's going on is all his fault and all that stuff. And the first thing that we have them do is have the parents read their individual parent treatment plans to their son
Wow.
about the agreements that they've made to address their part of this family system dynamic.
Okay.
And we start to it's pretty magical, honestly, that what we start to see is this identified patient dynamic
Mm-hmm.
where the son is this receptacle of all the bad in the family. We start to see it wash away.
Mm.
We start to see as the parents start to take more ownership for their own lives and their own symptoms and their own behaviors and their own difficulties, that it opens up more space in the relational dynamic and the therapeutic dynamic for their son to be doing the same thing.
Mm.
He reads his individual treatment plan, and
Wow.
then from there, where everyone's clear about what everyone's consensually agreeing to work on individually, now we can make agreements as a family on
Mm.
what it is that we're most wanting for ourselves, and then engage in a process of exploring what obstacles internally are in the way or have been in the way of us moving in that direction to begin with.
Okay. So let's explain to the listener a little bit about why you keep saying son, because if there's daughters out there, they're like, what
Yeah,
about us? What about us girls? Um, just explain a little bit about family first, where you're at, because I know you opened up a
100%.
a girl place, a female place, right, in Fort
Yes.
Lauderdale or something. We're gonna get there, but let's talk about
I'm
family
so
first a
used to
little.
saying sense. Yeah, I'm so
Yeah,
used to saying sense. For
but
years, we've
why?
only been, yeah, for years, we've only treated adolescent males.
Mm-hmm.
Then only in recent times have we partnered with we actually partnered with a program, really amazing program out in Dallas, Texas, called
Oh,
Roots Renewal Ranch.
okay.
And they treat adolescent girls in the same kind of residential treatment setting. And then
Mm-hmm.
we just launched a PHP day program for kids of all genders. And
Okay.
so this is a good reminder. I got to start saying boys and girls and kids.
Well,
And
it depends on what you're talking about. So let's go into family first a little bit, because that adolescent, well, it's a treatment center. Where is it located?
it's in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida.
Okay.
So about, hour and 45 minutes north of Miami on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's a residential treatment program for kids 13 to 18. 18 if they're still in high school, kind of hanging around high school kids and don't have a better beard than me, kind of a
Mm.
thing. Uh,
But now there's some of them, let me tell you, I seen it like in ninth grade, and I'm like,
I was about to say it's not that I have a better beard than me, but still. If they're hanging around like college kids and all that, that's probably not our guy.
okay.
The uh the way that we're designed is that we have multiple different locations spread around Palm Beach Gardens.
Okay.
And each of those locations operates as its own mini autonomous program. So there's about 10 kids in each of those physical locations. And then
Okay.
for each of those 10 kids, they get a minimum of 4 clinicians, a case
Wow.
manager, an academic coordinator, a staff nurse, a psychiatric nurse, and a host of support staff that we call counselor assistants and program coordinators.
Mm-hmm.
So they are just surrounded.
Yeah.
And as you know, coming from this world, as a result, with that much staffing, caseloads are really low. There's
Mm-hmm.
an unbelievable amount of individualized attention. We don't, kind of philosophically, we're not what's traditionally referred to as a behavior modification program.
Mm.
We're not concerned with controlling behaviors.
Okay.
We don't employ any kind of system of rewards or consequences.
Okay.
The containment behaviorally is done through relationship,
Mm.
done through respect and compassion and a certain way of treating them with dignity. which we think is pretty radically different than a lot of what I mean. There's several Netflix documentaries out right now that are showing what has been the prevailing approach to treating teens in our country
Oh
over
yeah.
30 plus years.
Yeah,
And
I mean, Paris Hilton had one, didn't she? And that one was, I had no idea about her story.
yeah,
And then when I watched that, I was like, oh, it gets me angry because I know I'm kind of like on the same page as you. It's about respect. Like when I had these, Department of Juvenile Justice kids coming into my office, or just those that have been in the system for so long and never was heard. And all I did was hear them and respect them. And that unconditional positive regard Carl Rogers talks about, and just going, why, what's going on, and listen. And but they were so activated, right? I mean, because I've had a lot of the kids, they weren't inwards, they were angry, and they're outwards punching teachers, and and ruining my office and stuff like that. And none of them ever try to hurt me, though, which, because I think they knew deep down inside that I was there to help. So I have a feeling that's kind of the same vibe over where you're at, is like they feel the energy of the people around them, and you're not trying to be over them and like, I'm the professional with the degree and you little, it's more of the, okay, why? Here's a safe space for you to really work it out.
yeah, and we're doing things, it doesn't feel like a hospital here or
Oh, I
something.
love that.
These homes are in residential neighborhoods. They're the gorgeous, 1 acre properties. We've got a house on the intercoastal.
Wow.
We take them to the beach multiple times a week for outings. We're going deep sea fishing and wakeboarding and kayaking and paddleboarding and really utilizing the environment around here to the best of our ability. They're doing things like surf therapy.
Oh,
They're
I
doing
love that.
things, it's incredibly experiential.
Yeah.
And as well as we're just trying to support them in having a certain kind of fun
Mm-hmm.
that really engages a part of their brain and their nervous system to start rewiring itself towards connection and health and aliveness that doesn't require some of these artificial means of getting those things.
Yeah. Yeah. The fake dopamine
Yeah.
hits every 5 seconds. And if you're a young person, listen, adults are going through this stuff too. It's just like, I think the reason that I adored working with adolescents is because at that age, their brains weren't fully developed yet. And so, like, oh, if they could get it at that point in their life, like, they're ahead of a lot of us, right? Because some of
Yeah.
us, like, we go through life battling and battling, not knowing until we know, if we ever get to know and understand. So tell me a little bit more about the outpatient because that's the facilities of like the rehab, right? The
Yeah, that's the
rehabilitations,
residential
the
program.
resident. Okay.
The PHP program, which is like
Mm.
a day program that runs about 8 hours a day from morning into the early afternoon. That it's really kind of amazing. I really love what we've created. And it's really in its infancy phase of kind of learning from and with the clients about what it is that they want this kind of out of this kind of a program and
Right.
all of that stuff. But some of the tenets of it are, one, that we're able to support them in remaining in school. So we're doing actually 2.5 hours a day of programming specifically geared towards supporting their mental health and accomplishing some of those more executive functioning kinds of tasks, organization, time management to execute on things like Florida virtual school assignments and
Okay.
studying and test taking and ACT prep and those kinds of things. And then
Wow.
they're transitioning into things like breath work and yoga and self-regulation skills and process groups around what's going on at home with their parents and their friends and their relationships that they just broke up with.
Yeah, and that means something. Like, that's
Yeah.
one thing I remember having young people coming in, and it's like they're broken hearted, and the adults around them weren't taking, you'll get over it, or it's like I know that parents are. I remember I raised four, right? My baby's 26, so it's like I get it, and I'm not perfect, mind you. Even though I'm a therapist, I was still a parent, and I had my own issues having to work through and stuff like that. I hope I do better with my grandkids, but with the tools that's what I'm saying. It's you are always learning new skills. So with this program that you just mentioned, now is this co-ed?
Go ahead.
Okay, and this is in Palm Beach only, or where? How do people find out about it?
The location of that program actually is in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay.
And you can go directly to our website. There's a page associated with it. You can call our main line.
Hmm.
The website is familyfirstas.com. And you can speak directly to our program director and our therapist, and it's pretty open source at the moment. And so you can talk to me about it. It's a lot of fun getting it off the ground. We only started it a few months ago, and we're already looking at a waiting list.
I believe it. It's needed.
It's a really nice, the way I relate to it, it's a really nice alternative where somebody can utilize their insurance
Hmm.
to that it is not a heavy out of pocket kind of cost for treatment. They can utilize their insurance the to access anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks of a full day of mental health treatment. And
Wow.
that doesn't require them to be pulled from and fall back behind in school.
Hmm.
Maybe they don't need to go to a residential program like we have in Palm Beach Gardens.
Hmm.
Maybe they just need a break from what it is that's going on at their home school, continue to receive services to address maybe the fact that they're feeling too anxious to get out of bed in the morning and go to school.
Yeah.
They've been experiencing bullying at school and they don't know what else to do. The and then we're able to not only address these things clinically, but we're able to come up with a plan with them and their family on maybe they return to that school, maybe they don't, maybe they go to another school. Maybe they just needed a short break and reset and go back in. The
Yeah.
those are some of the ways that I think it's really going to be a benefit to the people in the community down in Fort Lauderdale.
I love that. So, because we're talking to people outside of our counties, Broward and Fort Lauderdale, I do want to just maybe figure out a way to give them resource. Do you know of any resources like online or something like that? Or maybe you have it on your website or books or podcasts or whatever it is, because I don't want to let the listener leave without practical tools and tips in case they are teenagers or they have teenagers in home. Like, what would you say to them or give them?
Well, I'd say that the one of the commitments that we made as a company when we first started this, our founder James and co-founder Ben were clinicians for a long time at a local treatment center.
Mm,
And they weren't like business guys that got into this, the knew what they were doing, They just wanted to do the right thing and do something cool with kids,
yeah.
do something different. And one of the commitments that they made was if they receive a call from anyone, anywhere, whether that was somebody who was eligible for our program or not eligible for our program, whether that was a financial barrier or a location barrier or a gender barrier or whatever it was, since we were only treating boys at the time, they were going to follow that person all the way through to get them where they needed to go every single time. And that commitment has remained the same all these
Wow.
years later. When someone calls us and needs help or guidance, we do a direct handoff to the most appropriate provider, resource, level of care, so on and so forth. So one of the things that I would say is please call us. If you need
Wow.
anything, just let us know and we will point you in the right direction. Because it's
Yeah.
textual, what people are so uniquely having difficulties with. We have
Mm.
a bunch of people that are incredibly sweet and caring and non-judgmental and trained to really listen to the heart of what's going on with you. And
Yeah.
uh, aside from that, I think that I mean, this is a little bit of my bias, but I think it might be a little bit of yours from what you were sharing with me too, is I think that too much of what has been called therapy these days is not therapy at all.
Mhm.
The My suggestion to anybody who's looking for help in the way that I've been describing and in the ways that we've been kind of relating to these difficulties is look for somebody that has extensive training in trauma,
Mhm.
specifically early developmental trauma. The ask questions about what their training is and all and their background and all of that kind of stuff. And if it doesn't feel like there's a good fit for you, then you know, call us and we'll set you up again. Like
Yeah.
sometimes we just have to keep at it.
Yeah. It's true. It is. It's like we all have our own biology, right? Makeup. We all have our own psychology, right? But, whatever tribe raised you, or whatever village has raised you, we all have different experiences. And then we all have our own theology, right? Like how we approach a higher power or how we see that. And then to me, that's why, it's the Holistic Counselor podcast, like to have that understanding that you are a mind, a body, and spirit, and you have a purpose. So understand that. And it's about finding that purpose. Are you looking out, like you said earlier, like, the social media and just trying to find who you are, like that listen, man, I never heard that story that way with narcissists, like in the Greek mythology, right? It's like, whoa, you just blew my mind with that, Mike. It was wonderful. And so, as we wrap this up, Mike, what would you say to your teenage self right now?
Hmm. What would I say to my teenage self right now?
Yeah.
Uh, hmm. Depends on what year. That's funny. Um, I think uh I think what I'd probably my teenage self might think I'm a dork now, first off. But the I think that that would be okay. The I don't know if I'd say a whole lot, honestly. I think I think something that my teenage self really needed was just
Yeah.
really needed somebody that didn't have an agenda for me,
Mm,
that didn't try to be right about me and tell me what I should do, think, feel, and all of that kind of stuff. And somebody that could just really be with me and be
mm,
curious about me and help me to think about and reflect on what was going on in my own inner world.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that's probably if I had the opportunity, I think I'd like to just spend some time with them without any kind of agenda and see where that goes.
Yeah. Right. And I think with me, I would want to tell teenage Diana that it's okay. You're going to be okay. You know, wow. All right. So this was great, Mike. I know I could keep talking with you and everything, but I also know my listeners probably have a short attention span. and and I know we both are very busy people. So I would love to have you on maybe in the future when, who knows, we could talk about so many other things. Um, any final words of encouragement to the listener, not to the inner teen?
Maybe to the listener, I like ending with this one if it's okay. It's a tiny little piece that I heard. Um, One of my favorite quotes by a guy who was a famous mindfulness teacher. His name was, he passed away a few years ago. His name was Thich Nhat Hanh.
Mm.
And Thich Nhat Hanh, I was listening to him speak one time, and he said this, it just always stuck with me. I have a little add-on of my own to the end of it, but we'll start with his, which he said, the greatest gift we could ever give to our children is our own happiness. And he said, because they'll take responsibility for it.
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
My little add-on is that the equal and opposite is also true. They'll take responsibility for our anxiety, our depression, our workaholism, our alcoholism, our marital difficulties. They'll take responsibility for all of it. And so really, from my perspective, the greatest thing we could ever do for our kids is to address the obstacles in the way of us moving towards greater degrees of connection, health, aliveness, happiness, fulfillment in ourselves, so that we can be there for them to navigate that same kind of territory.
Yeah. Wow. Perfect way to end it, man. Wow. All right. So, as we wrap up, I want to remind you, listener, to trust in the Lord, guard your heart, and renew your mind. Bye. And now for the disclaimer to make sure you understand that you are responsible for you. The content provided on the Holistic Counselor podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or mental condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast are my personal opinions and do not represent the views of any professional organizations with which I am affiliated. Call your doctor, 911, or 988 immediately if you have a medical emergency. The Holistic Counselor podcast does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Holistic Counselor podcast, guests appearing on the podcast at the invitation of the Holistic Counselor podcast, or other listeners to the podcast is solely at your own risk. Confidentiality notice. If you engage with the Holistic Counselor podcast by commenting or posting and are a client, please be aware that you may be revealing information that could compromise your confidentiality. Please remember that disclosing your identity or personal details can be linked to your clinical material. As a therapist, I am bound by confidentiality and will not respond to any disclosures of this type on this podcast. I am committed to upholding the ethics and confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship, which extends to all forms of communication in accordance with the laws and professional guidelines that govern mental health professionals. I want you to know that your privacy is of utmost importance, and you are responsible for protecting it when interacting on this platform or any other public forum. Thank you.